The James Brickworks Museum is at Toogood Avenue, Beverley, in the western suburbs of Adelaide, South Australia. Part of the site of the brickworks was set aside as a school reserve when the township of Beverley was surveyed. Instead, it was purchased in 1886 by a dairy farmer named Henry Toogood, after whom the road on which the Heritage Park is situated is named. Henry died in 1920, and Albert James bought the land for his brickmaking in July 1923. James had been making bricks at Welland, next to the River Torrens, but floods in June 1923 may have encouraged him to move his operations. Other pits were known to have remained flooded for weeks afterwards. When brickmaking began in 19th century Adelaide, the methods used were those which had been in place for centuries in Britain. A brickworks would be established around a pug hole, where clay could be dug from to make the bricks. There would be one or more buildings where the bricks were made, sheds known as hacks where the bricks dried, and kilns to bake them hard. The clay was soaked and kneaded by hand until it formed a pug. In this form it was still pliant enough to be moulded, but also it would dry out quickly. The pug was thrown into a wooden mould by the moulder, then the excess pug smoothed off with a wooden board called a strike. The moulder's assistant removed the brick in its mould, and the moulder would repeat the process. Some workers could make up to 1,200 bricks in a 10-hour shift. The assistant removed the brick and the mould, and when a dozen or so were ready, they were taken on a wheelbarrow to one of the hacks to dry for about a week. Then the bricks were fired in a kiln. Gradually, steam-powered brickmaking machinery was introduced to the industry, which enabled businesses to make up to 10 times the number of bricks in a day than could be made by hand. Hand-moulded bricks were still being made by some of the smaller of the 50 or so brickmakers in Adelaide, operating in the 1950s. The site was used for brickmaking until November 1974. By this time, most of the small brickmakers had gone out of business, and a few major companies remained, which had the finances to update their facilities with modern technology. In November 1974, the Woodville Council purchased the site to use the pug hole as a rubbish tip, the most common method used to fill in the clay pits in Western Adelaide. They also had plans to establish a brickmaking museum, aware that the surviving buildings here were a rare example of the industry as it was in the early 20th century. There were 5 rectangular kilns here when the council purchased them, but the most easterly was already decrepit, and a building inspector recommended it be pulled down before it fell down, which was done around 1975. At the same time, the office, drying sheds, moulding shed, and engine house were demolished. The other 4 kilns, plus the circular kiln, still stand today, although there is concern for the structural stability of some of these. The circular kiln is the only one of its type left in South Australia. Some unemployed people were given work clearing the area in 1976, but then the site sat disused for years, as the funds for the proposed museum could not be found. Finally, in the 1990s, old machinery was brought in from other defunct brickmakers in the area, and a pavilion built to display it. Sadly, concerns about the safety of the crumbling kilns delayed the opening of the museum, planned for 1998. In 2017, gardens, a shelter, paving, fencing and signs were installed, and the brickworks at long last became an open-air museum, free to visit during weekdays. Guided tours are available through the Charles Sturt Council. It remains a well-kept secret, however. Most people in Adelaide are probably unaware that it is there.